Right, good morning everybody. Apologies first of all for the delayed start of this session due to technical difficulties, but I hope that hasn't inconvenienced anybody too much. So it's the time is now 11:47 unfortunately, but we will continue and hopefully we'll have sufficient time to finish this session before we break for lunch around 1 o'clock today. Firstly, just a quick check, I think, of technology for people who are on this call. So for the council, I believe we have Mr. Williams. So you're on mute, Mr. Williams.
Apologies, that's correct, ma'am. Peter Williams.
That's lovely, thank you. Good morning to you. We have Mr. Jameson from the council solicitor.
Thank you, ma'am.
And we have Mr. Nick Pleasant from NJL.
Morning, ma'am.
Yeah, good morning to you. So I think that's everybody who's participating in this particular session. For the benefit of persons who are, sorry, Mr. Williams, Mr. Pleasant, were you going to say something then?
Yes, sorry, I was going to say, Gareth Finch from Peel, our client, is also sitting in on the call and is
that's fine.
is present.
Thank you for letting me know that. Yes, well, if Mr. Finch, if you wish to participate, then that's fine as well. If there's any particular points you want to raise in your support to Mr. Pleasant, and that's absolutely fine. So good morning to you, Mr. Finch.
Good morning, thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome, thank you. So for the benefit of those parties who haven't joined any of the sessions so far for this examination, I will just go through a few operational matters, procedural matters. So my name is Helen Hockenhull and I am the Chartered Town Planner and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct this examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Corby Part 2 local plan. Now the hearings will take the form of a structured discussion based on the matters, issues and questions that have previously been prepared and published on the council's website. I will lead the hearing and ask the questions and invite people one at a time to join the discussion. Responses should be directed to me. I will usually start with the council for them to provide some explanation to the background to individual policies and their approach. You should not attempt to speak unless invited to do so. And if you want to speak on a particular matter, then please use the raise hand facility so that I'm aware you wish to speak and I can invite you into the discussion at an appropriate time. Now, during the event, unless you are speaking, it will be helpful if you can keep your microphone muted to minimise any background noise. If you become disconnected from this event, which we hope doesn't happen, then please contact the programme officer and he will do his best to get you back into the session and into the discussion. When you finish speaking, please remember to turn off your microphone and lower your hand. For the benefit of third parties who may be watching this event, when you refer to documents, can you please try to refer to their full title and examination reference number if you have that, rather than by some abbreviation or other form of acronym. Now, I'm sure you're aware this hearing is being live streamed via the internet and a copy of the recording will be kept on the council's website. At the end of the hearing, I will end the session and ask participants to log out. Please ensure you attend the hearing from start to finish and avoid leaving the screen except during a break or at the end of the session. This particular session, we intend to complete around about 1 o'clock if we're able to do so. So are there any questions from anybody about the process and how we're going to proceed? No? Excellent, that's good, thank you.
Not about process, ma'am. I'm just struggling to find the raise hand function.
Right, if you click on the participants icon at the bottom, that will bring up a list of all the people involved in this session. And then at the bottom of there is a little raise hand.
Right, icon. I'm with you.
Yes. Have you got it?
Yeah, got it.
Excellent. Yeah, I know it's a little bit strange. It takes a little while to get used to the technology, but
yeah, that's a new one, that one.
No problem at all. Okay, so to start our discussions then on Matter 8, delivering economic prosperity, I think I'll turn to the council first of all, just to set the scene here really, in terms of what is the position in terms of employment land, what is the requirements, and what the Part 2 plan is providing. So I'll turn to Mr. Williams, please.
Thank you, ma'am. builds on the delivering economic prosperity chapter of the joint core strategy, which is setting out a job creation target of 9,700 for Corby at the end of the plan period. So the strategic policies seek to safeguard existing committed employment sites and seek to enhance existing employment sites through refurbishment and by regenerating previously developed land. The JCS allocates strategic sites in Corby for employment development. It requires additional sites to be allocated in Part 2 local plans or neighbourhood plans if there's a shortfall in the supply of deliverable sites to meet the minimum job targets. So we want the Part 2 local plan to build on the JCS and note the rapidly growing, and we in the council note the rapidly growing population, central location within country and good accessibility to major urban areas, together with the lower land values, which are making it an attractive location for economic growth. So that's the overall background. And in terms of employment land provision, we prepared an employment land review in association with consultants to look at the demand and supply for employment land over the plan period. We looked at sites between 0.25 hectares and 5 hectares. But in actual fact, the employment land review looks at all possible sites, but then when we look to allocate, we only allocated between those two sizes taken forward in the plan. Larger sites are a matter for the JCS strategy and its subsequent review. So the net job growth target, which I mentioned before, the 9,700, implies a requirement for 400,000 square metres of additional employment for space over the plan period. Against this, outstanding planning permissions and the strategic allocations in the joint core strategy provide capacity for over 850,000 square metres of employment floor space. So that is roughly twice the estimated need. However, despite this oversupply, the Employment Land Review did recommend a further 11.4 hectares of employment land be allocated in the plan, which provides an estimated additional 38,000. This is justified, which we've noted in the plan. As an area pursuing strong economic growth, additional land provides for flexibility, choice and competition and strengthens Corby's position to attract one-off large business requirements, which are difficult to predict. So although we did think about it, we had a little larger sites, but it seemed to us it was still worth allocating these smaller sites. And also some of them tend to be sites anyway in existing employment areas, which would only be suitable for employment land. So it just safeguards those. So it's kind of not doing any harm, but we're obviously aware that we've got a lot of employment land already. So Policy 8 lists the non-strategic employment sites to supplement the strategic offer. So we've got 4 non-strategic sites and 2 sites in the long-term land reserve, which we tried to clarify what that meant in your questions, Ma'am. The Employment Land Review considered they had no immediate evidence of demand depending on how the market progresses, but depending on how market progresses, may have market potential during the plan period or in the longer term, and should not normally be released for non-employment uses. So that gives us policy 8. And then in the rest of the chapter, in terms of employment uses in established industrial estates, the chapter also identifies existing industrial as a main supply of employment land, and we've listed 8 or 9 or so in the Part 2 local plan. And we note that while some of these estates are fairly modern with good accessibility and a wide range of good quality units, some estates will require refurbishment of some of the older buildings, particularly some of the smaller buildings. We've got a bit of a problem in Corby at the moment. They're still providing a vital function, but it's starting to come to end of life. In general, the occupancy rates at the industrial estates are high, so we want to monitor their performance. So I think that's gone in the monitoring framework as well. Policy 9 then looks to enhance the attractiveness and sustainability of these areas for future investment and to support existing and future occupiers by allowing ancillary facilities such as children's nurseries, creches, financial services, meeting, conference facilities, and so forth. So that's policy 9. And then finally, we go on to look at non-employment uses in established industrial estates, which is other than the small scale ancillary uses just mentioned. So loss of these sites can harm local businesses, which may find it difficult to find suitable replacements. The council wishes to seek to retain the established estates for employment use in order to ensure that there's opportunities for relocation and incoming businesses, unless there's no reasonable prospect that the sites will be used for that purpose in the future. So where buildings have become obsolete or vacant and marketed for a long period of time, and we're suggesting 2 years, then the council would consider alternative uses, maybe depending on the impact the proposals will have on the industrial and business areas and on other policies in the local plan. So the new uses should not compromise or hinder the future operation or expansion of adjoining businesses by placing unreasonable restrictions on them because changes in nearby land uses. The policy 10 identifies the criteria which proposals for non-employment uses within the established industrial estates will be considered. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. That provides a very good summary to the chapter as a whole in terms of the economic prosperity and the council's approach. I want to go back to the starting point, if you will. Clearly, there is an oversupply of employment land in the borough. That was recognised by the Joint Core Strategy Inspector in his report. He did make reference to the fact that there was potentially some requirement for non-strategic sites within the Part 2 local plans to help provide some choice in the marketplace. So in your view, the sites that are coming forward, how do they provide that choice and that different type of employment uses? How does that assist employers in the borough?
Well, I think, Mum, a lot of the sites that have come forward in the JCS, they are extremely large sites and they're fantastic for big inward investors. But we also want to give a choice for some of the small and medium-sized companies who would like to come into the borough. And I don't think that the JCS sites, in many cases, are going to fulfill that need. So we still felt it was important to have some smaller sites and safeguard some of the sites where I think that sometimes the buildings have been lost. They've been cleared. But we still want to safeguard them because they are adjacent to the existing smaller industrial estates. So we've got quite a nice mix in Corby at the moment, and we wanted to preserve that mix. Okay,
that's fine. So those strategic sites that providing employment uses in the borough, what options are there within those to provide for the smaller businesses or startup businesses? Is that really what you're looking to provide with the non-strategic sites that you have referenced in the Part 2 plan?
Well, in some cases, you've got the former Rockingham Speedway area. There's a lot of sites there, and like I think we've got Centrix Park and which have been subdivided. So there is that option for design and build according to a client's need, and that's fine. I still don't think that would be suitable for some of the smaller, because some of them just want a small workshop space, whereas some of these prestige sites, I think they're great, but I don't think on their own they're going to fulfill all the needs of the borough. That's why we specifically wanted a policy to protect the range of the smaller sites we've got.
Right, okay, that's fine. That's helpful, thank you. Right, I noted that in the employment land review, you recommended 9.6 hectares of non-strategic employment sites on 5 sites. But your Part 2 plan is suggesting an additional site there, St Luke's Road, St James Industrial Estate. So you actually provided slightly more than the Employment Land Review suggests. Can you explain the rationale behind that, please?
I think that comes from table 4.1 in the Employment Land Review and Employment Land Review update. It's because that was a previous state local plan policy, and it had permission, and I think that was part of the figure that we quote in the Part 2 local plan. The outstanding planning permissions, but that then in the update that fell off. That it expired.
Right.
So
okay. Right.
I think it was a timing thing.
Right. So it was a commitment in that it was a site with planning permission. So that's why the ELR didn't recommend it to be an allocation. And since then, things have changed. Circumstances have changed effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I went to visit the site the other day. They flattened the land, but they seem to be storing cars on it. So,
right.
What's going to happen with that in the next few months? So we're allocating it, but we want because it adjoins the existing employment estate plus a large Tesco. So we want to retain the site, but.
Right.
It already had permission, so it's all about the timing. It sort of slipped off, but they started developing it as I was doing the Employment Land Review update. So it's a little bit of a funny one.
Right, it's just circumstances have changed. Yeah, basically. Yeah, that's fine. That's okay then. We've already mentioned that there is a significant oversupply of employment land in the borough. It has been for some time. So can we just look at the long-term land reserve? And I am aware that you are suggesting 2 sites to meet that long-term reserve, Tri-Park and Saxon 26. So in that context of oversupply, what's the justification for allocating 2 long-term land reserve sites?
In the case of Tri-Park, it was clearly original three parcels of land. One's gone to an Aldi superstore. One of the others was a very nice building which actually burnt down. The site's been vacant ever since. Whether it'd be useful for something else, I don't know. It may be contamination issues on that site. They've marketed it heavily for employment use. And one of the site is vacant. Again, that backs onto another existing employment estate. So it's a continuation really. But we've got quite good potential there, and it's also near the strategic road network. Saxon 26, again, that's a derelict building in the middle of an industrial estate, so there wouldn't be anything else for that to go to. I wouldn't have thought at this point. It's just when the consultants looked at it, they didn't see much potential. They're thinking it's going to be difficult at this, or the market when they looked at it, to be able to provide a new build B2, B8 building. Yeah. It kind of, we wanted it. We didn't, it's what do you do with it? So it's in a land, it's in a long-term land reserve was the answer that we came up with in conjunction with the consultant.
Right, okay. The ELR, from what I can remember, identifies 8 sites as possibly long-term land reserve. And then your current plan is looking to allocate, well, effectively identify 2 sites for long-term reserve. From the 2 sites that we've been looking at there, it seems to me that they are would it be fair to say they are in an existing industrial site? So their existing uses are employment uses?
So that's right. Saxon 26 is in the middle of industrial estate. On Tri Park, one of the sites could possibly go to housing. Sort of site at the front, and there's kind of like mixed residential employment, and the one at the back, again, it is near. They're really close together. So yeah, they are and were existing in employment areas, which would seem to make sense to retain them as employment sites.
Okay, so in that sense, would they not normally come through for employment uses through the normal development management process if they have that existing use for employment purposes?
I think it was a recommendation from the consultants, and we sort of welcomed their experience of the fact that they didn't see any demand in a lot of the sites. They recommended it was long-term land reserve. I mean, I guess in a sense, if it doesn't make that much difference, I don't know. They may get a planning application in the next few weeks. I think the market has changed so much since that was done, and with the pandemic and everything that's happening in Europe, it's very difficult to see what would happen in the next 12 or 24 months and up to the end of the plan period. But it may be the case that there's going to be pressure on housing as opposed to employment, and I guess they didn't see sense in allocating it as a site if there was very little demand. But this kind of flags up that we've got demand either towards the end of the plan period or beyond the plan period.
Yes, I understand that. I suppose the point I'm trying to make is on those two particular sites, bearing in mind that the employment land review basically said that there was no evidence of demand for those sites or development interest at the time the review was undertaken, and even that there were better sites that might attract demand, would those sites be more likely to come through the normal development management process? Why do they need to be identified as long-term reserve sites if the findings of the employment land review were such that there probably wasn't any demand for them at the moment in time, and not only that, they could probably come through the normal DM process anyway? So what's your view on that? Do they need to be in the plan as long-term reserve sites? Is it justified?
They could be in the plan as non-strategic sites, but we wouldn't want them not in the plan, because I think they may well be lost to other uses in the meantime.
Would other development management policies not prevent their loss?
Well, there's a lot of pressure in that part of Corby for residential, so I can see them being. I can see there's a danger of them being lost. But yeah, I think there's a danger that they would be lost. We would like, if possible, to see those particular sites in the plan in some form.
Right. Okay. So I suppose really the council's approach is trying to achieve a balance of a range of sites for non-strategic uses. I suppose my concern, which I've raised in the MIQs, is whether or not, I mean, bearing in mind the level of employment land that there is in the borough at the moment and the significant oversupply, in supply terms, those sites aren't needed. So then, therefore, what is the justification for them to be identified as long-term reserve sites?
It was just about providing the mix. I mean, Saxon 26 is in an existing industrial estate, so it may well be the case if it wasn't there wouldn't be any pressure for any other uses. But this does give some certainty. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen to the industrial estates in 15, 20, 25 years. So this does at least kind of give some indication where we're trying to where we're trying to go as a council, and we're trying to protect our existing in industrial estates, and we're trying to, when putting in the plan helps with the marketing.
Yeah.
It's an allocation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Right, okay, so the point I really, what I'm looking for is some justification from you, and I think I've got it really, is that these sites aren't needed in terms of supply, because there is a more than adequate supply, but there are good reasons, there is justification for them to be identified as long-term reserve sites for other reasons.
I mean, the supply is large strategic sites, a lot of it. That's why we have got ourselves this huge oversupply. Yeah. But in terms of sites of the Part 2 local plan, smaller sites, small and medium sites, we've not got as much at all. Particularly sites that normal businesses could maybe, you know, someone coming in who hasn't got a big business could afford, and this just gives a little bit of extra choice we've got, Mum.
Okay, can you give me a figure of the actual balance between the sort of larger strategic and the smaller non-strategic sites in the borough, just to reinforce the point you just made?
In the employment land review, I think it's table 4.1. We've got strategic in scale. We've got 306 hectares.
Sorry, can you repeat that? You were just breaking up slightly.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the land areas by category. I think it's table 4.1 in the employment review. I think. Apologies. I think that answers the question. So you've got identified in the joint core strategy. You've got 153 hectares to be allocated in the local plans, 9.6 hectares, and strategic in scale, which will be subject to the next review of the JCS, 306 hectares. So I think it's small compared to the strategic sites.
Right, okay, I'll have a look at that table anyway, but you're just trying to establish the balance really. You're making the comment there about the significant number of strategic sites and that they're much less supply in terms of the non-strategic smaller sites for small and medium firms. So I'll have a look at that table, and that I'm sure will provide me with the actual data to support that position. Okay, that's all right, thank you. I think looking at policy 8, I think I did also ask a question about whether or not the policy wording was effective in terms of the long-term land reserve sites providing for needs beyond the plan period. And from my recollection, are you proposing a modification?
Yes, that's right, right, Ma'am. We've tweaked the wording in the submission version. Would you like me to read it out, Ma'am?
No, it's okay. I've got it here actually. I just managed to pull it up, so that's okay. Yeah, so I think that's fine. That it's really to reinforce the point that those sites are for longer term reserve. I may not come forward during the plan period, but maybe later. But depends on the market effectively and the potential. Yeah, no, that's fine. We've covered that. That's okay. Can I ask, in terms of the sites that you are allocating there, E1 to E4, are you able to give me a little bit more information about the nature of those sites? Are they deliverable? Are they available? Are there any particular constraints, viability issues? Can we start, say, with the land off Courier Road?
Yes, that's a site owned by, well, it was owned by Corby Borough Council. It had a planning permission was granted for the storage of vehicles for a lease hire company. I checked with the head of property yesterday actually, and he said it was sold last month, but the current situations, nothing is going to happen, and they can't give a date when that's going to happen. But it's an application which it sounds like that is going to be developed in the next 18 months to 2 years by the sounds of it.
Right, okay. And are there any particular constraints? Viability, drainage issues, contamination, gradients?
It's a strange shape site by the Corby Retail Park, overgrown, possibly contamination, although there's office uses nearby. It was nothing that can't be resolved.
Right, that's the key point really, is that they're not insurmountable, whatever the issues are, that they can be resolved, so the site is deliverable. And is the site viable in that respect, as far as you're aware?
As far as I'm aware, Mum.
Right, okay. The land at Corby Innovation Hub then. What can you tell me about the Innovation Hub?
Yeah, Corby Borough Council had the opportunity to purchase what was a training academy. This must be going about 3 years now, and they took that opportunity. It's for sort of small startup businesses, so it's quite nice. But it had more land around it. They thought that could be better used. So they asked if we could consider allocating some land around the back. Nothing's happened. Again, I checked with the head of property yesterday. Nothing's happened with that. He'd still welcome that being allocated for employment use. It is in the grounds of the existing hub, so it wouldn't be able to go for anything else.
Right, so it's an appropriate and suitable site in that respect. Yeah, are there any particular constraints, technical issues that need to be resolved on that site, or viability issues?
I'm not even sure if that's been looked at yet, Mum, to be honest. Right. I'm not sure.
Right, okay, but it is clearly, it's in a reasonable location next to the Innovation Hub, so it would support that.
A planning application has come through on another part of that site for some sort of small distribution type B8. So they've had another application on that site. So I'd have to check that planning application to see what any issues. But I'm not certain.
Okay. That's okay. All right then. The Princewood Road site. What can you tell me about that one? 1.6 hectares for B2B8.
Road, yeah. Well, it was being marketed heavily for a couple of years. B2B8 design and build. It's now off the market. I went and had a look at it. Nothing's happened on that site, so I'm not sure of the status. I just know it was being heavily marketed. It's in the middle of an employment estate. There's applications for energy centers around there as well. So it is a contaminated area, but there is employment going. There's employment in that area.
Right. Okay. Thank you. But you don't aware of any particular constraints that can't be overcome that might prevent the site coming forward?
No, I don't believe so.
Right. Okay. So that leaves us St Luke's Road, St James Industrial Estate, 1.8 hectares.
Yeah, that was the one we were discussing earlier, Mark, but an employment estate with smaller units, also near a Tesco Extra store. So the site's cleared, applications for plant maintenance depot. It's not started. It looked like it was a police compound or something with some police cars and all sorts of other vehicles on it. So what's going on there at the moment, I'm not sure. But it looked like they were about to build something, and then it stopped. So the ground.
Okay, so you're confident that site can come forward within the planned period?
Yes, we are. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Okay then. That's probably all I need to ask you, I think, on policy 8. You're pleased to know. So if we move on then to policy 9, employment uses in established industrial estates. I asked the question in my MIQs, is that policy justified and effective? So would you like to respond to that for me, please?
Please may I have a...
Just find your place.
Thank you. Is policy 8 effective in Spain the long? No, that's not the one. Policy 9.
Policy 9, employment uses in established industrial estates. So clearly the background to this policy is to retain existing employment uses in established industrial areas, but the policy does provide for certain other ancillary services and facilities within those established areas. Yes, like you mentioned in your introductory comments to this particular session, that there was a need for some of those existing industrial estates to be modernised and refurbished, and the policy provides for that, for modernising and enhancing the physical environment and infrastructure, and that will be supported, which is good. Then it goes on to look at ancillary services and facilities. So perhaps you could just give me a little bit of background behind your thought process and your approach on existing industrial estates.
I know the employment land review felt there was a problem with the viability of refurbishing particularly some of the smaller B1 units. So this helps to address it. Any opportunity to do so will be taken. But also some of the walk to ancillary facilities like the nurseries, creches, meeting and conference facilities, leisure sports, cafe will be generally committed to, which will boost the industrial estates. Leisure sports, they may help to see some new development there. So whilst we don't want to lose some of these smaller units, we realise that we need to meet modern needs of the modern worker, like providing creches, like lunches and things like that. Conference facilities may allow this diversification of uses. So I think that was the thinking behind.
Right, okay. I think one of the questions I was asking was about retail uses within existing employment areas. And in looking at that, I was thinking of the very small scale sort of convenience type retail that maybe provide the tea, the coffee, the biscuits, the milk, the sort of essential things that offices and other industrial uses may need. So what's the council's view in relation to retail uses, certainly small scale convenience retail within established industrial areas?
Yeah, I mean, this does seem to be a bit of a tricky one, ma'am. I mean, we've mentioned cafes, but if we're talking about retail, then we would prefer those assessed under the retail policies. Otherwise, it's going to cause confusion. Are we looking at underemployment, or are we looking under retail? I think I'm noting town centres potentially affect the vitality and viability of defined centres, and they would normally be considered under policy 19, which is a network of hierarchy of centres. So we've got the impact threshold would kick in, and possibly the sequential test. We would between what's retail under the retail chapter and what's small scale. So yeah, coffees would be fantastic, but I don't know where you would draw the line, really.
Well, I suppose there could be an option within policy to restrict any retail uses or other uses to a particular size or a particular scale. I mean, the policy itself looks at part A, they are small scale, and then 6.14 above that suggests that those small scale development proposals of less than 1,000 square metres with site area of less than 1 hectare. So there may be an option within policy, if you were to go down the line of saying, well, retail uses may be appropriate, there could be an opportunity to restrict the scale of those so that it's very clear that it is literally for that very limited convenience type retail that serves the needs of those employees within that estate. That possibly is an option that you could go down, but I'm just interested to learn whether or not you feel that that is appropriate, or whether the policy is effective as written, that it doesn't necessarily discount that. What's your view?
It doesn't necessarily discount that. Time for small scale retailing, but we've lost a number of units in the main Corby centre in the last 2 to 3 months even, and I think we really wanted to be clear that we want to adopt a town centre first policy and not really consider retailing at the small industrial estates.
Right, okay, thank you. Can I bring in Mr. Finch? You want to make a comment on this?
Yes, thank you, Mark. It's not really an issue we've raised specifically, but I just thought I might try and help your discussion. You know, we do operate as well as retail parks as a manager of property. We operate, you know, various mixed-use office parks and other commercial type locations, and you know these locate either individual sites or an amalgamation of sites. You know, they can be home to thousands and thousands of workers during the day, during the working day, and I think you're absolutely right. There is a real need for those people to be able to, whether it's on the way to work or from work, or during lunch hours, to not just be able to get a coffee, but to do a small convenience shop. And the converse approach would see them instead being told, well, yeah, we understand you need to buy a sandwich, or you might need some bread and milk and potatoes for this evening, but actually you're going to have to go into the town centre 4 miles away to do that. It's really breaking that notion from a practical and sustainability perspective. And that's why I think you're absolutely right to raise the question the way you do. And I think there's no harm at all and no threat to town centres by, you know, vitality and viability in providing those kind of limited scale, limited range facilities to support. And, you know, they will only help the marketability of those commercial areas and increase the attractiveness to occupiers and investors.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Mr. Pleasant, you've got your hand up there. Do you want to add to this debate?
Yes, I mean, I think I've just raised my hand slightly after Mr. Finch, but just to echo that, obviously his comments in terms of the ancillary nature of retail, and it was really just to point you, Mum, in the direction of the recent planning permission for retail unit at Corby Retail Park, where which we've referenced in our hearing statements, where the council has accepted that a unit of the scale proposed, which was just under 1,000 square metres, split over ground floor and mezzanine, was ancillary to the wider industrial area, and indeed that the retail park itself, on a wider basis, performed a supportive and ancillary role to the wider industrial area. And I think it's worth noting as well, just kind of the scale of the uses involved. Yes, there are a number of retail units at Corby Retail Park, but also, yes, it sits very close to a significant employment area to the east of the town. So there is a certain proportionality as well to the retail park as a whole in the context of the wider employment land provision, position, and ancillary use considerations, I would say. Hence the points that we've made in terms of retaining the retail park within the wider industrial area, and how that can come forward entirely alongside and supportive of wider policies on town centre uses, which we'll obviously we'll talk about.
Yeah, we're going to come to that shortly. Actually, in terms of the employment boundary and the retail part being within it, but I'm coming back to that. Mr. Jameson.
Thank you, Mum. Everything you've heard has referred to retail in this context as ancillary. And I do note, I don't think I'd be inhibited from putting forward an ancillary retail use under policy 9, when the second paragraph says ancillary services and facilities, including but not limited to. And I'd have thought that gives a proper focus that if you want to bring forward a retail, then you've got to concentrate in your application in demonstrating that it's not establishing a rival retail facility to the town centre, but it is in fact ancillary to what's there. And I don't think that would be precluded on the wording of the policy as you have it under policy 9, Mum.
No, that's helpful, thank you. Yeah, I'm just testing that argument really with the council, but I do accept that's the way the policy is worded. Yeah, no, that's helpful, thank you. Mr. Pleasant, do you want to come back or something? Is your hand just left up there?
No, if I could just come back, I think if that's okay, Mark, I think it would just be useful to include the word retail in that policy. But if we are talking about ancillary uses, then there is no reason, in my professional opinion, to exclude retail from that. It would be tested as per other uses in that policy. But it just provides some clearer clarification that, you know, you could have a cafe, all kinds of other facilities, but somehow a retail use would be completely out with some sort of ancillary function, which I think we've tried to explain wouldn't be the case. So I think it would be helpful if retail were specifically noted in that policy wording. Okay, right. This clearly is something that I will bear in mind and consider the wording of the policy and the comments that have been raised today. So thank you for that. What I want to come on to now is the actual site boundaries and how they are defined and are they appropriate. In general terms, Mr. Williams, the boundaries for the established industrial estates, were they reviewed as part of the work and the evidence for the Part 2 plan?
The boundaries were essentially drawn from scratch, as that we require them for the employment land review. So we drew them up. There's various different sources, GIS mapping and sense checking. And then when they were required for the Part 2 local plan, they were copied. There were some boundaries in the minerals and waste local plan we looked at, but they weren't complete. So that is our initial go, and we've refined it over the next couple of years, and in response, I think, to some comments saying, I think from BOC saying we should be part of this. So we've had another look. So it isn't a definitive set that we think will never be changed, subject to review.
Right, okay. That's fine, okay. So clearly the point I want to move on to is the issue that in relation to the Corby Retail Park and what appears to be an error on the council's part. So can you just take me through what's happened there and what the council's position is?
Yeah, I mean, we put our hands up to an error there, really. I think because they were for the employment land review, we perhaps did it. We just took the red line outline, not worrying too much at that point what was inside. For the employment land review, that was fine, but when we did the Part 2 local plan, we copied it across, and of course we didn't spot it until later in the process that the retail units shouldn't be there. We were wanting the retail units to go under the retail, and that's confusing. We feel they're quite separate, or they may be. You know, you want the context of the retail parks in the industrial area. There's still a distinctive retail park there, and there are sequential impact tests which we wanted to consider or have the opportunity to consider when planning applications come forward. So it came out. It was later in the process when we realized we corrected the error as soon as we spotted it.
Right. Okay, that's fine. So, Mr. Pleasant, I know you want to come back on this particular point. I want to explore with you why you feel it is appropriate for the retail park to remain within that employment area boundary. So, Mr. Pleasant.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that the role that the retail park plays in the wider industrial area. We've talked just now about the ancillary nature of that. There's also the part of again, referring back to the recent planning permission at the retail park, the sort of the type of units which are provided, which are unashamedly larger units which meet a certain need, but have and hopefully Mr. Finch won't disapprove of me saying this too much, an industrial character, shall we say, in their appearance. They are different to a town centre retail unit.
So what sort of units are they? What types of operators are in these units? If they have the character of an industrial unit, what companies are we talking about?
I mean that in the sense of, sorry, rather than character, a better way, perhaps the appearance, should I say. The retailers at Corby Retail Park, you have the large Asda store, you know, things like TK Maxx, Next, Boots, and such like. Sorry, not TK Maxx, Matalan, all of which sit within that previous wider boundary, shall we say. We think it's telling that the Employment Land Review considered the employment area as a whole and included the retail park within that boundary, presumably due to the function that it serves, both in terms of the employment area and the wider Corby retail market. Our point is that we haven't seen any evidence since then which demonstrates why the retail park should not be taken out of the industrial estate, industrial area boundary.
Well, I think the evidence is basically the council's hearing statement, isn't it, at the moment?
To an extent, yes, but there's nothing to say why the Employment Land Review was necessarily wrong in coming to a conclusion that the retail park can be within that wider industrial area.
Right. Do you accept it would not be usual situation for a retail park to be included within an existing employment allocation?
I think there are examples of retail facilities being included within industrial areas. I don't have examples of those specifically to hand, but I would be more than happy to send across examples following the sessions if that would be helpful. We're dealing with a current situation in the northwest, which is not dissimilar to Corby, whereby there is a retail asset close to an industrial and employment area where it's been accepted that the retail uses are part of the wider offer of the employment area, and they add to the attractiveness in market terms of that use, in part due to providing the ancillary and supportive facilities that we've talked about, and also in terms of employment and job creation.
Yes, I can understand that. Yes, but is that sufficient justification for what is quite a significant retail park to be covered by an established employment area definition?
Sorry, could you repeat that for me, Mum?
Sorry, I was going to say, is that sufficient justification for quite a significant retail park to be included within the boundary of existing established industrial estates? I can understand what you're saying in terms of maybe an individual unit or a smaller scale retail use, but in terms of the scale of Corby Retail Park, is that appropriate to be included within an established industrial area?
I think it can be considered appropriate, because if you look at the relative scale of the retail park compared to the scale of the wider industrial area, I think there's a case
okay
on that point.
Right, okay. Can I just bring Mr. Finch in then, please? You want to add to this?
Yes, thanks, Mum. I mean, obviously we are where we are. We know what the local plan or the drafted, the emerging plan has said at the various consultation stages, and we've been more or less content with that. and then of course surprised to see post submission even this quite fundamental change, which is, you know, it's been characterized as a minor modification, but it's clearly much more than that. I'm happy to discuss how, you know, what the best way forward is. You know, for me, it's wrong to say, well, it's just a mistake, therefore the boundary needs to be changed and the retail park drops out. The question then arises, well, how should it be dealt with? And I think that, you know, there's a potential alternative way of dealing with it, which is to, referring back to the council's own evidence base, acknowledge and recognise the fact that it exists, that it exists in performing a vital function for the town as a whole as part of its network of retail facilities. It's a genuine local alternative, very close to housing and employment areas that hopefully can avoid the need for residents and workers to access that kind of facility as distinct from a town centre, to drive to Rushden Lakes or Kettering, to those kind of retail parks in more distant locations. And there's merit therefore in it being identified accordingly as an established retail and commercial location, not on a par with a town centre clearly, but clearly recognised within the hierarchy in the network as a location where it's appropriate. If there's a large format proposed which can't go in the town centre, then to avoid it leapfrogging to some other sporadic solus location, the sense would be for this to be the next preferred location for that certain type and scale of operation. And then only if it can't be accommodated there would the sequential approach take you to somewhere else in another out of centre location. So I think to me that's, you know, in all fairness, recognising where we are and trying to come up with a solution, you know, that could be an alternative approach.
Right, okay, I think just to clarify, clearly the plan as submitted, the council felt at that stage that that plan was sound. The judgment and the assessment I have to make is whether the plan as submitted is sound with the retail park included within the established employment area boundary. Effectively, that's the way I have to look at it. So can I look to the council now, Mr. Williams? Can you address that particular point for me then? So clearly the council, in suggesting that it was an error and it needs to be altered, is suggesting that the plan isn't sound with that, with Corby Retail Park being included within the boundary for sites within policy 9. So can you explain to me why you feel it isn't sound?
It's Corby Retail Park is, I think it's the last application that was referred to suggested it was 1.7 kilometres away from the centre. It is clearly an out of centre retail park. We've assessed it as part of the evidence base. We've looked at the NPPF. We've looked at the JCS. We are.
Sorry, I've lost you, Mr. Williams. You've gone quiet there. Sorry, I've lost audio, I'm afraid, Mr. Williams.
Oh. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry, yeah. Can you just repeat what you were saying there?
Yeah, I'm trying to explain that we're quite clear as a council. This is an out of centre retail park. We assessed as such in the assessment of retail town centres paper. It's 1.7 kilometres away from the town centre. So although we do value it, it adds a lot to the borough. I don't see how you can say it's part of an employment area. I know of no precedent where that would be the case. We looked at the NPPF, we looked at the JCS, and it's an out of centre. I hold my hands up to a mistake which I made, but it seems to me that it's sort of jumping on a mistake rather than we've corrected that mistake as soon as we spotted it. You know, it's people arrive there by car. You know, by car. It's a car-focused retail park. You know, it's got Asda, it's got Curry's, Matalan. It's a typical composition of a retail park. So we're quite clear.
Right. Okay. Can I just for my clarity, so I understand this, in terms of the ELR evidence, you made reference to the fact that in terms of that assessment, the retail park was included within the employment area boundary. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It was for the mapping it was done as by way of background. It hasn't impacted on any of the figures at all.
So the rationale behind that, you think that was just purely a mapping exercise? It wasn't featured. That was just purely a mapping exercise. And again, what you're suggesting it wasn't again in error. What I'm trying to establish was, did the employment land review in mapping the retail park within the employment area, did it come to any sorts of conclusions, or how was that dealt with in the review?
I'd have to check the employment line review again, ma'am. It was just the consultants asked for the layers in order to make some of their site visits and some of their initial assessments. It hasn't made any change that I can think of to any of the sites that were allocated or taken forward.
Right. Okay. I think that's all. I'll check the ELR myself again. Just I can't recollect anything within that would directly references Corby Retail Park, but I will check it in detail just to see what it actually says and what the implications of that are. Okay. Thank you for that. Is there anything further from either Mr. Finch or Mr. Pleasant on this before we move on to policy 10? No. Oh, Mr. Finch, yes.
Yeah, sorry, ma'am. Yes, I mean, obviously you've reminded us all of the question that you have got to find the answer to and grapple with. And you've asked the direct question back to the council as to why the plans unsound as submitted.
Yeah.
I don't know, how do we deal with the follow-on question, which is, well, if it's unsound as submitted, what's needed to make it sound? And that's where I think there's, I don't know, I've given you one point of view and one hopefully positive suggestion of an alternative way forward, which does, Mr. Williams did confirm again in what he just said that the council does value the facility and what it does for the borough. I disagree, it's entirely car dependent. It's very, very close to lots of chimney pots and lots of employment workers, and it's well served by a bus, and that case has been made through the DM process on numerous occasions. That's why planning permissions have been issued. But that's a bit of an aside. It doesn't escape the fact that, well, how does the council think it ought to be dealt with and taken advantage of in policy terms? Because it can actually be part of the council's defence against other opportunistic, sporadic, soulless retail proposals, if they were to say to those proposals, well, it will be most sustainable if actually these additional retail warehouses, instead of being, where they can't be accommodated in Corby Town Centre, ought to be accommodated first and in preference at an existing facility where there can be more linked trips and a more sustainable dimension to that kind of additional provision. Got to make sense, surely, in planning and sustainability terms.
I will come back to the council in a minute on that point, on the way forward. And I think I know what you're going to say, but can I put this to you? If the Corby Retail Park is retained within that boundary, the site will then be subject to policy 9, would it not?
Which is the employment policy.
The employment policy. As a retail site, would also be subject to the retail policies. So how would that work in practice?
I think it would work in practice. I'm not sure. I might have to defer to Mr. Pleasant on this, but in practice, we've just had an application that's gone through the DM process, albeit obviously in advance of this examination and this particular emerging plan being given weight and its policies accordingly. I'd have to look at the wording of the policies alongside one another.
Yeah. This is why I'm raising it, because it's clearly that I'll have to look at in more depth to look at the best way forward on this particular issue, and for to come to my own conclusions on not party plan is sound or not with the position we're in now. Can I go back to Mr. Williams then, in terms of if I were to come to the conclusion that the policy was unsound as drafted, what would be the outcome? What would the council be looking at for a solution? As Mr. Finch is there suggesting, what is the way forward?
I did note that the planning application that was referred to did go straight through without any the impact tests which suggests local plans didn't apply, which I understand, and the sequential test. I'm not sure that was really taken on board, but we do have outline permission in the town centre for a larger unit as part of the market way scheme. So we'd like the opportunity for that site to be looked at before we say any new development would go to Corby Retail Park. So I just think that gives us less flexibility, and at least if we get the chance to work with the retail, both the town centre to people and the retail park team, and just see what sites might be available. So I think that would restrict some of our options.
Right. Okay. Can I just say to you, clearly, the test I have to follow in terms of looking at this plan is whether or not it's sound as submitted. And clearly, in submitting the plan to the inspectorate for examination, the council's view is the plan is sound. You're suggesting an alteration to the established industrial estate boundary because it's an error. So am I right in saying that if I find that it is unsound on that basis, the solution, the rectification, the modification you're seeking is that Corby Retail Park must be removed from the boundary of an existing industrial estate, so it is no longer subject to policy 9. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. That's what I thought you were trying to achieve. Mr. Pleasant, can I come back to you, please?
Yeah, it was just to make a point, Mum, around the soundness and how the two policies would work together.
Yeah.
It's not insurmountable to be considered under two separate policies. Indeed, a planning application would be considered under many different policies anyway, and obviously it's consideration of the development plan as a whole. It's not just a binary yes or no against an individual policy. There's a balancing exercise to be made, and obviously the retail park could still be within the employment area and still be subject to other retail tests. I appreciate we're perhaps straying into matter 9 slightly in terms of how that's approached, but
we'll come back this afternoon.
All I would say, and try to sort of summarise on that, is that the plan was submitted and was considered to be sound with the retail park in the employment area. It would be subject to policy 9, and we would ask that policy 9 is amended to allow for ancillary retail uses. And there is a threshold within the supporting text which talks about 100,000 square metres being an appropriate level for ancillary. So, notwithstanding points that we would make on the hierarchy of centres and how the retail park is dealt with in town centre policy use terms, the retail park could be in the employment area. You could have a small amount of retail development come forward, which is ancillary, which supports the employment area and doesn't detract from the town centre in terms of vitality and viability, in which case it would be entirely appropriate under policy 9. If it was for a large amount of retail floor space, the council could equally sit around and say, well, it's not ancillary, it needs to be considered under the town centre use policies, principally policy 19, and could be dealt with that way. So it's not an insurmountable position that the retail park is specifically within the employment area under policy 9. And I think actually being within the employment area delivers potentially significant benefits, as we've detailed in our hearing statement. Particularly the points, paragraph 2.1 in our matter 8 statement. I appreciate I'm continuing to talk on that, and I will end there.
That's fine. Now, clearly it's something that I need to review following our discussion today, look at all the evidence and come to my own conclusion on the soundness of this particular policy in the boundary. But conscious of the time, I'd like to move on to policy 10, just in brief terms. This is the non-employment uses in established industrial estates policy. So turning back to Mr. Williams there from the council, can you give me a little bit of background on this policy, what you're trying to achieve, and do you feel this policy is effective?
Yeah, I think this policy is necessary. It was one we had a look at. Initially, we looked at Wellingborough, and they did something very, very similar, and we've got certain similarities. Us and them. We want to try and preserve employment uses in the established industrial estate, but we have been under pressure to release some of those. We've had applications for gymnasiums and all sorts of things, which may be fine. But I think one of the points we wanted to get in, which wasn't in the JCS, was this issue of the marketing and how long did you try and market something before you allow it to fall to a different use. And we've had some people that we've had applications saying they really want to open a gymnasium. They've only marketed it for 9 months. Is this enough? And although we're quite supportive, we're having quite a few of those applications coming in. That seems to be the problem. And the thing about the gymnasiums, gyms as well, it's you've got traffic from some of the neighbouring units, which seems to be causing a problem. So we don't want to say no or being flexible, but we wanted to have a policy which would normally keep employment units as some type of B use, unless a strong argument is put forward for a change. Hence we've drafted this particular policy.
Right, okay. I mean, you've very helpfully moved on to what I wanted to discuss with you, which is the issue really about marketing, and that being for a period of 2 years. So do you think that length of time is appropriate for all types of uses?
It's very difficult to come up with a figure. I don't think some of the ones I've had, it have been 9 months is enough really, because if it's too short, you could have sort of people saying, oh, I intend to, and not doing a strong campaign and looking at some of the costs. It just seems 2 years was seems to be about right. Any shorter, you're not really going to explore the options, and you're not encouraging people to, because really we want to sort of see a document with some of the best ones you've seen, who the inquiries have been from and the outcomes, and that's quite a nice document to see, and it's such a varied sort of evidence we get from applicants on this particular issue. We just felt we wanted to set out 2 years seemed to us to be about right. It's what Wellingborough felt was the same as well. I think maybe in the town centres, I think we're saying 12 months. I think that's more appropriate for sort of perhaps some of the smaller shops, because you don't want those to be, that can be quite not good for town centre to leave. And we've got quite a few vacancies as well, but we haven't got very many vacancies. We sort of, it's really at churn sort of level. It was as of 18 months 2 years ago anyway. Things may have changed, but at that time we felt 2 years was right.
Do you have any evidence to support that 2 years, that threshold? I'm really quite interested in this because you made reference there to smaller units within the town centre. Equally, you could have the same argument about smaller industrial units. If it's a relatively small scale unit, is it appropriate and proportionate to expect them to market it for 2 years before they can then sell it on to an alternative use?
No, I take your point on that, Mum, that there may it's something we could maybe look at. There may be different time periods for different type of units. I don't have anything to say. Some should be 1 year and some should be 2 year. I wish I did, to be honest.
I appreciate that. I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that the way the policy and the supporting text is drafted, it's quite clear that you're looking for 2 years. It may well be appropriate just to modify that slightly to give that little bit of flexibility, possibly through negotiation, particularly with very, very small scale sites where 2 years may just be too onerous, really. It might be something that you might want to go away and think about. Yeah,
I would certainly be able to maybe say something like around 2 years. Do you think that might be appropriate?
Yeah, I don't need the solution now. You can go away and think about it. But that's the point I'm trying to make, just so you understand where I'm coming from on this, and where in certain circumstances it may be appropriate to have a lesser marketing period for various reasons. Can I just bring Mr. Pleasant in, please?
Yeah, it was just to sort of provide some feedback, if I may, Ma'am, from a sort of a commercial planning perspective, as it were. I think there's been talk about gyms and sort of ancillary uses and such like. I think it's important, perhaps, just to note that how fleet of foot a lot of these occupiers can be, and how quickly they often need certainty, and that obviously has implications for the landlords for these premises. And there was a point made earlier in relation to policy 8 that there's potential viability issues with refurbishing existing industrial units. And I make this more as a general observation rather than something which specifically relates to our interest at the retail park.
No, that's fine.
It just seems to me that if there's an issue in terms of the viability of refurbing existing industrial units for continued industrial uses, yet there's an identification of additional sites within the plan, that you could have a more relaxed approach to the marketing of these sites. 12 months, for example, has been a maximum, but then having an approach which seeks a discussion around the marketing, because ultimately a 12-month marketing process for a small scale B2 or B8 unit may just result in the unit being sterilised for 12 months, and actually you don't achieve the wider gains which can be delivered as a result of having some ancillary uses in those employment areas. So it was really just an observation from that point of view in terms of how the marketing process might work in reality, and the implications that could have for the existing industrial areas. I'm sure the council don't want to see units sitting vacant for any longer than they absolutely need.
No, that's helpful comment. Thank you, Mr. Pleasant. Mr. Finch.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, and again, like Mr. Pleasant, just a bit of a commercial perspective to try and help your sort of thinking and understanding around this, particularly in the current circumstances. And Mr. Williams has already sort of outlined the uncertainty, and who knows what's going to happen in what direction in terms of many occupational sectors. But 2 years is a hell of a long time. If somebody's sat on a vacant unit and struggling to find occupiers, even 12 months. If you were to, if Mr. Williams was to get somebody coming in now with a small commercial building where, I don't know, let's say 5,000-10,000 square feet, that's clearly not going to make any significant impact in a town where we know there's an oversupply already of employment space. And then particularly if he's got interest from somebody who wants to put a use in there that can support the wider employment area, be it a gym, whatever else. To me, it's a question of what really, in the current circumstances, is the harm in that. If it's a use which can otherwise support the area, and cause no harm in terms of, in terms of the supply of that kind of accommodation, is there not an argument for there not being a threshold at all in that kind of circumstance? In terms of a time threshold, if there's perhaps thought given to a threshold that there might be in terms of the size of unit that this kind of approach might apply to. As I say, it's an awfully long time for an already struggling. You're probably going to be looking at people who they're going to be a little different to commercial buy-to-let residential landlords if they've got those kind of properties of that kind of scale. They need that income from that smaller property. I'm not talking of the likes of my employer at all. I'm merely trying to give a perspective across the piece. These can be individuals' small pension pots, these kind of buildings and facilities. And I think to have to say to them, sorry, mate, come back in a year's time or 2 years' time when you've had it on the market for that length of time, even though we recognise we've got way too much of this space already, and your use actually won't cause any harm, but it might actually help the employment area, seems a bit onerous.
Right, okay, thank you, Mr. Finch. That's helpful, your further comment there.
Right.
I think that's food for thought for the council. As I said, I think it's up to the council now to go away and possibly rethink this in light of the discussions we've had today, and I'm quite prepared for the council to add this to their list of things to do, shall we say, following our hearing sessions. I'm just conscious of the time that it's now 8 minutes past. I think that's probably all I need to mention in terms of employment. I do recognise some modifications the council have put forward in light of the youth classes order changes. I have looked at those and I think those are fine. I don't have any comments or questions in relation to those. So unless there's anything further from anybody, I think we're okay. I will then just close this session and thank everybody. Thank you very much for your participation and your assistance this morning. Thank you.